Elena's knees nearly buckled as she read the third letter again, the paper trembling between her fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably real, not a computer printout or modern forgery, but genuine ink that had aged to a sepia brown. The paper itself felt decades old, its edges yellowed and brittle. "Dear Elena," it began. "By now you're wondering if you've lost your mind. You haven't. You're standing in what was once Millicent Moss's sewing room, though the estate records will list it simply as storage space. The floorboard beneath your left foot creaks. Step to the right. You'll want to sit down for what comes next." Elena's gaze dropped to her feet. She was indeed standing on a loose floorboard that groaned under her weight. Instinctively she stepped right, her practical black boots finding solid ground on the ancient oak planks. This wasn't possible. Estate appraisals were supposed to be routine. Catalogue the furniture, assess the artwork, document anything of value for the auction house. She'd done this dance hundreds of times in houses across Oregon and Washington, from Portland penthouses to coastal cottages. Her reputation was built on methodical precision and emotional detachment. Elena Vasquez didn't believe in coincidences, supernatural nonsense, or anything that couldn't be researched, verified, and priced. Yet here she stood in a room that shouldn't exist, reading words that couldn't have been written. The hidden chamber was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with no windows and walls lined floor to ceiling with built-in shelving. Every shelf held neat stacks of letters, organized by date, stretching back decades. A single bare bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows that made the cramped space feel even more claustrophobic. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, the way Dr. Martinez had taught her during those difficult months after the divorce. Control the breathing, control the situation. But her pulse hammered against her throat as she continued reading. "You're thinking about Dr. Martinez right now, aren't you? About the breathing exercises he taught you when Richard left, and you thought your world was ending. You wore that same black blazer to your first appointment, the one you're re-wearing today because it makes you feel armored against uncertainty." Elena looked down at her blazer, the one she'd chosen that morning from her meticulously organized closet. She always wore black for estate appointments, professional, unassuming, forgettable. But how could anyone have known about Dr. Martinez? She'd never told anyone about the therapy, not even her sister Carmen. Her hands shook as she set the letter aside and reached for another. This one dated 15 years earlier. The same elegant handwriting, the same cream-colored paper. "Dear Elena, tomorrow you will meet Richard Castellanos at the coffee shop on 23rd Avenue. He'll order a double-shot cortado and compliment your burgundy scarf, the one your mother gave you before she got sick. You'll think it's fate. It isn't. But marry him anyway. The marriage will teach you something important about the difference between love and need." Elena sank onto a wooden crate, her legs suddenly unsteady. She remembered that day perfectly. October 15th, 12 years ago. She'd been running late for a client meeting, ducked into Stumptown for coffee, and literally bumped into Richard. He'd been charming, apologetic, and yes, he'd noticed her scarf. The burgundy one with the little golden threads that caught the light. Her mother had given it to her during one of her final good days, before the cancer treatment stole her appetite and her laugh, and finally her breath. Elena still kept it in her bedroom drawer, too precious to wear but too painful to see. She grabbed another letter, then another. Each one contained intimate details of her life, written decades before they'd happened. Her college graduation, the night she'd decided to become an estate appraiser after helping settle her grandmother's affairs. The morning she'd found her mother unconscious in the garden. The afternoon she'd signed her divorce papers, sitting alone in her car afterward and crying until her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks. Someone had been watching. Someone had been recording. Someone had turned her entire existence into a chronicle of predetermined events, filed away in this impossible room like a specimen in a jar. Elena's chest tightened. She'd built her career on bringing order to chaos, on making sense of other people's messy lives through their possessions. Control was everything. It was what separated her from the dysfunction and unpredictability that had defined her childhood. She scheduled her days in 15-minute increments, color-coded her files, and never left anything to chance. But if these letters were real, if someone had been orchestrating her choices all along, then control was an illusion, free will was a lie, and everything she'd believed about herself was just another entry in someone else's elaborate record-keeping system. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She needed air, needed space, needed to think rationally about what she'd found. But as she turned toward the hidden door, one final detail caught her eye. A single letter sat apart from the others, placed prominently on the center shelf. Unlike the aged cream paper of the others, this one was stark white, the ink still dark and fresh. It was dated today. Elena's hand hovered inches from the white envelope, her rational mind warring with primal instinct. The letter seemed to pulse in the harsh light of the bare bulb, too bright, too fresh, too impossible. She jerked her hand back as if the paper might burn her. No, she wasn't going to read it. Whatever game this was, whoever was behind this elaborate hoax, she wouldn't play along. Elena Vasquez dealt in facts, not fantasies. There had to be an explanation. Hidden cameras, an elaborate prank, something. She'd figure it out later, when she wasn't trapped in this suffocating room that smelled of dust and secrets. She pushed through the hidden door and stumbled back into the kitchen, gulping the musty air like it was mountain spring water. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone to check the time, 11:47 a.m. She was supposed to finish the initial walkthrough by noon and submit her preliminary assessment to Morrison Auctions by 5. Her schedule was already falling apart. The kitchen looked different now. Ordinary, almost mundane after what she'd discovered behind its walls. Avocado green appliances from the 70s, linoleum curling at the edges, a window over the sink where someone had once watched the seasons change. Just another abandoned house full of abandoned dreams, exactly like the hundreds she'd catalogued before. Except it wasn't. And she couldn't pretend otherwise. Elena forced herself to complete her rounds, photographing rooms and making notes in her tablet with mechanical precision. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar ritual even as her mind raced. Living room, mid-century sofa, water damage to hardwood floors, oil painting of uncertain provenance. Dining room, mahogany table with 6 chairs, china cabinet, crystal chandelier missing 3 bulbs, normal things, sellable things, things that made sense. By 12:15, she was back in her Honda Accord, hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared at the moss-covered house through the windshield. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing peeling paint and broken shutters, a garden gone wild with blackberry vines. It looked haunted now in a way it hadn't that morning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Still on for dinner Sunday? Miguel wants to show you his soccer trophy." Elena smiled despite everything. Her nephew's gap-toothed grin was one of the few things that could crack through her carefully maintained composure. Sunday dinners at Carmen's house in Beaverton had become sacred, the closest thing to family tradition either of them had managed to create after their childhood of constant moves and their mother's erratic moods. She typed back, wouldn't miss it. "Tell him I want to hear everything." Another text popped up. This one from her assistant. "Morrison wants the Moss House prelim by 4 p.m., not 5. Client pushing for fast turnaround. You okay? You missed your 11 a.m. check-in." Elena stared at the message. She never missed check-ins. In 3 years of working with Jenna, she'd never once failed to stick to their agreed schedule. Her reliability was legendary in the industry. Elena Vasquez, the woman who could walk through a hoarder's nightmare and emerge with a complete inventory, organized by room and value category. Something came up. "We'll have report ready by 4. She started the engine but didn't put the car in drive. Instead, she sat there thinking about her life. The life that someone had apparently mapped out in yellowing letters decades before she'd lived it. A tiny apartment in southeast Portland with its color-coded filing system and meal prep containers lined up in perfect rows. Her calendar that accounted for every 15-minute increment from 6 a.m. wake-up to 10 p.m. bedtime. The way she'd rebuilt herself after Richard left, brick by careful brick, into someone who couldn't be surprised or abandoned or hurt. But what if none of it had been her choice? What if her obsessive need for control was just another predetermined response, as predictable as a lab rat running through a maze? The thought made her stomach clench. She'd fought so hard to be different from her mother, who'd lurched through life from crisis to crisis, dragging Elena and Carmen behind her like debris in a tornado. Mental illness, the doctors had said eventually, but by then the damage was done. Elena had sworn she'd never be that chaotic, never be that helpless, never leave her life to chance. She'd chosen estate appraisal specifically because it was about endings, helping families sort through the remnants of lives already lived, stories already concluded. There was safety in dealing with the past. The past couldn't surprise you, except apparently it could. Elena pulled out of the driveway and headed toward downtown Salem, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. Every turn felt predetermined, every traffic light part of some larger pattern she couldn't see. By the time she reached her favorite coffee shop, the one where she always stopped between appointments, she was questioning every impulse. Did she actually want coffee? Or had someone written that choice in a letter 30 years ago? Elena sat in her parked car outside Grind Coffee, staring at the familiar red brick facade through her windshield. She came here every Tuesday and Thursday between appointments. Always ordered a medium dark roast, no cream, no sugar. Always sat at the corner table by the window where she could review her notes in peace. It was part of her routine, as predictable as her morning alarm. But now, the routine felt sinister. How many of her choices were actually choices at all? Her phone rang, jarring her from the spiral of doubt. Morrison Auctions flashed on the screen. Elena, thank God. Patricia Morrison's voice was tight with urgency. I've been trying to reach you. We have a problem with the Moss estate. Elena's pulse quickened. What kind of problem? Legal complications. Turns out there's a surviving relative, someone who's been paying the property taxes all these years. They've just surfaced with a claim, and their lawyer is demanding we halt all proceedings immediately. That's impossible. Elena pulled out her tablet, scrolling through the estate documents. I reviewed the genealogy report myself. Millicent Moss died with no living relatives. That's why it went to the state. That's what we thought, too. But apparently someone's been maintaining the property from a distance, paying utilities, taxes, even hiring a landscaping service once a month. The lawyer says their client has been waiting for the right time to come forward, waiting. The word sent ice through Elena's veins. Who is it, the relative? That's just it. They won't say. Complete radio silence on identity. But Elena, here's the strange part. They specifically requested that you continue the appraisal. Said they want you to finish what you started. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random legal red tape. Someone knew she'd found the letters. Someone was watching. Did they say anything else? Just that you'd understand when you... Elena, are you listening? You went quiet. She was thinking about the white letter. The one dated today that she'd left sitting on that shelf like a coward. The one that was probably predicting this exact conversation. I'm here. Patricia, I need to ask you something. When did you first hear about the Moss estate? Who brought it to your attention? A pause. You know, that's odd. I've been trying to remember that myself. It just appeared in our system one day with a note that you'd been specifically assigned. I assumed it came through the usual state channels. But now that you mention it, you never received official paperwork. No. And Elena, there's something else. The address. I drove by yesterday to check on the property, and there's no number on the house, no street sign either. I had to use GPS coordinates to find it, and even then I got lost twice. It's like that place doesn't want to be found. Elena looked back toward Salem, though the house was miles away and hidden by trees and fog. She thought about how she'd almost missed the turnoff herself, how the GPS had glitched right before she'd spotted the driveway, how the whole property felt separate from the world, suspended in its own pocket of time and moss and secrets. What do you want me to do? She asked, though she already knew the answer. There was only one choice that made sense, and perhaps that was the point. Perhaps every option had been carefully arranged to funnel her toward this moment. Finish the appraisal. Whatever's going on, we need documentation. And Elena, be careful. This whole thing feels orchestrated. The call ended, leaving Elena alone with the weight of decision. She could drive home to Portland, write a report based on what she'd already seen, and pretend the hidden room was just another storage closet full of old papers. She could maintain her schedule, her routine, her illusion of control. Or she could go back. She could read that white letter and find out exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. Her reflection stared back at her from the coffee shop window, a 42-year-old woman in a black blazer, gripping her phone like a lifeline. She looked professional, competent, completely in charge of her own destiny. But behind her calm exterior, Elena felt the careful architecture of her life beginning to crack. Everything she'd built, every choice she'd made to distance herself from her mother's chaos. What if it had all been scripted? What if she was just as powerless as she'd felt at 8 years old, watching her mother pack their belongings into garbage bags at 3 in the morning because the voices said it was time to move again? Elena started the engine and turned back toward the highway. But instead of heading south to Portland and safety, she pointed the Honda north toward Salem and the moss-covered house that held the answers she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The white letter was waiting for her, and Elena Vasquez, despite everything she believed about choice and control and free will, was going to read it. The drive back to Moss House felt like swimming upstream against her own instincts. Every mile north was a mile further from safety, from the predictable world where estate appraisals didn't contain prophecies and houses didn't hide rooms full of impossible letters. Elena's hands cramped from gripping the steering wheel too tightly, her knuckles white against the black leather. She pulled over twice, once at a gas station where she sat staring at her phone, Carmen's number highlighted but not dialed, and again at a scenic overlook where she could see the Willamette Valley spread below like a patchwork quilt of ordinary lives. People down there were having normal Thursdays, grocery shopping, picking up kids from school, arguing about dinner plans. None of them were driving toward a house that had somehow chronicled their existence before they'd lived it. The smart thing, the Elena thing, would be to turn around, to write up her report based on the rooms she'd already catalogued and submitted to Patricia with a recommendation for a more thorough inspection by someone else. Someone who hadn't found their life story filed away like evidence in a cosmic filing cabinet. But she couldn't stop thinking about her mother. Rosa Vasquez had spent Elena's childhood chasing invisible patterns, seeing conspiracies in coincidences and meaning in random events. She'd drag Elena and Carmen from apartment to apartment, following signs that only she could interpret, a recurring number on license plates, a particular song playing in 3 different stores, dreams that felt more real than waking life. "Someone's pulling the strings, Mija," she'd whisper during their midnight relocations, "but I'm going to figure out who." Elena had sworn never to become that woman. Never to see patterns where none existed. Never to chase shadows down rabbit holes of paranoia and delusion. Control was sanity, logic was safety, facts were the only truth that mattered. But what if her mother had been right? What if there really were strings and someone really was pulling them? The thought made Elena's chest tighten with something that felt like betrayal, not just of her own beliefs, but of the woman she'd worked so hard to become. Every choice she'd made since leaving home at 18 had been designed to create distance from her mother's chaotic worldview. The career in estate appraisal, methodical, and grounded in tangible value. The apartment organized like a museum display. The calendar that accounted for every moment, leaving nothing to chance. She'd built herself into the anti-Rosa, and now the universe was suggesting that Rosa might have been the sane one all along. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. Morrison called again. "Says you're heading back to the house. Everything okay? You're kind of freaking me out with the radio silence." She stared at the message. Patricia knew she was going back, but Elena hadn't told her that. She'd simply hung up and started driving, following an impulse that felt both entirely her own and completely foreign. How had Patricia known? Unless Patricia was part of it too. Unless this entire day, the assignment, the legal complications, the mysterious relative, was just another chapter in whatever story someone had been writing about her life. Elena started the engine again, her decision crystallizing into something that felt less like choice than surrender. She had to know. Whatever was in that white letter, whatever truth or lie or impossible prediction it contained, she couldn't live with not knowing. The uncertainty would eat at her, turning every future decision into a question mark, every moment of her carefully controlled life into potential evidence of manipulation. Better to know and be destroyed than to live forever wondering if she was the author of her own story or just a character in someone else's. The fog thickened as she neared Salem, rolling off the hills in grey waves that reduced visibility to mere yards. She missed the turnoff to Moss House twice, her GPS flickering in and out like something was jamming the signal. When she finally found the driveway, the house loomed out of the mist like a ship emerging from a storm, dark, silent, and somehow expectant. Elena sat in the car for a long moment, engine running, heat blasting against the October chill. The smart woman, the careful woman, the woman who'd spent decades building walls against chaos, was screaming at her to leave, to drive back to Portland and pretend none of this had happened. But the daughter of Rosa Vasquez, the little girl who'd once believed that patterns had meaning and that someone somewhere was always watching, that girl was already reaching for the door handle. The white letter was waiting. And Elena Vasquez, despite every instinct that had kept her safe and sane for 42 years, was finally ready to read what someone had written about her future. The car door slammed behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through the fog-muffled afternoon. Elena stood on the gravel driveway, keys heavy in her palm, and felt the last threads of her old life snap like piano wire under tension. There would be no more pretending this was just another assignment. No more clinging to the fantasy that she could catalogue the impossible and file it away under miscellaneous household items. The house waited, patient as a predator. Moss had crept further up its walls since this morning, or perhaps the shifting light made it seem that way, green fingers reaching toward windows like something alive and hungry. The front door hung slightly ajar, though she was certain she'd closed it when she left. The gap was just wide enough for shadows to spill out onto the sagging porch. Elena's footsteps on the wooden steps sounded different now, heavier, more deliberate. Each board creaked a greeting she didn't want to hear. When she pushed through the door, the house exhaled around her, releasing the scent of decades and dust and something else, something that reminded her of her mother's perfume, though that was impossible. Rosa had been dead 3 years, and she'd never set foot in Oregon. The kitchen doorway beckoned from the end of the hall. Elena walked toward it like a woman approaching the gallows, her professional composure finally cracking. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone's flashlight. The battery showed 60%, more than enough, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the house would find a way to leave her in darkness when the moment came. The hidden door stood open exactly as she'd left it, revealing that suffocating rectangle of blackness beyond. But the shelves looked different now. Where this morning they had seemed randomly organized, tonight Elena could see the pattern. Letters arranged not just by date, but by significance. The ordinary moments clustered together on lower shelves, her first job, college graduation, the purchase of her Honda. But the higher shelves held the earthquakes of her existence, carefully curated and impossibly documented. And there, on the shelf at eye level, the white envelope waited. Elena crossed the threshold into the hidden room and felt reality shift around her like sand. The musty air pressed close, intimate as a lover's whisper. Her flashlight beam trembled across the letter, illuminating her name written in that familiar, impossible script. Below it, a date, October 17th, 2024. Today. She reached for the envelope, and her fingers brushed against paper that felt warm, as if it had been waiting in someone's hands instead of on a dusty shelf. The flap opened easily, too easily, releasing the scent of ink and intent. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Elena unfolded it with the care of a bomb technician, though she knew that whatever explosive waited there was meant specifically for her. Elena, you are reading this at 2:43 p.m. on a Thursday in October, standing in a room that shouldn't exist, holding proof that your life has been written by someone else's hand. You've been fighting this moment since you found the first letter, but you came back anyway. You always come back. Elena's eyes flicked to her phone. 2:43 p.m. exactly. Tomorrow you will drive to Portland and submit your resignation to Morrison Auctions. You will tell Patricia that personal circumstances require you to take an extended leave of absence, though you and I both know you'll never return to estate appraisal. That life, the careful, controlled existence you built as armor against chaos, ends here. Next week, you will receive a phone call about your mother's storage unit in Phoenix, the one she rented under a false name, the one you've never heard of. Inside, you will find documents that prove she wasn't delusional. She was recruited. Just as you are being recruited now. The patterns she saw were real, Elena. The watchers she sensed were watching. And the reason she could never stay in one place too long is the same reason you were led to this house today. Some bloodlines carry obligations. Some families exist to serve purposes larger than their own happiness. Your careful, ordinary life was the cover. This moment, reading these words in this impossible room, this is your true beginning. Elena's hands began to shake violently. The letter fluttered like a captured bird. You have a choice, though it may not feel like one. You can walk away from this room, drive back to Portland, and spend the rest of your life pretending you never found these letters. You'll be safe. You'll be comfortable. You'll also be complicit in events that are already in motion, consequences that will unfold whether you participate or not. Or you can stay. You can read the other letters, the ones that explain who wrote these and why, and what comes next. You can learn why your mother ran and what she was running from. You can discover what you were really trained for during all those years of learning to see patterns in chaos, to find meaning in the remnants of lives. The choice is yours, Elena Vasquez, but choose quickly. Your watchers have been patient, but patience has limits. You have until sunset. M. The letter ended there, but Elena's ordeal was just beginning. She looked at her phone, 2:47 p.m. October in Oregon meant sunset by 6:30, less than 4 hours to decide if she wanted to remain Elena Vasquez, estate appraiser, or become something else entirely, something her mother had been running from her entire life. Elena stared at the letter until the words blurred, her mind reeling with the implications. Less than 4 hours. The deadline felt arbitrary and urgent at once, like someone was forcing her hand. She folded the paper carefully, slipping it into her blazer pocket where it seemed to radiate heat against her ribs. The other letters called to her from their shelves, hundreds of them, a lifetime of predictions waiting to be verified or disproven. But before she could reach for another envelope, footsteps echoed from somewhere in the house above. Elena's blood turned to ice water. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor overhead, too heavy to be settling wood or mice in the walls. Someone else was in the house. She killed the flashlight and pressed herself against the hidden room's wall, heart hammering so loud she was certain whoever was upstairs could hear it. The footsteps paused directly above her, as if the intruder was listening too. Then they resumed, moving toward what she remembered as the staircase. Elena pulled out her phone to call 911, but the screen showed no signal. Of course. The house that existed outside normal GPS coordinates wouldn't allow something as mundane as a cell tower connection to intrude on its carefully orchestrated drama. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and began moving down the hallway toward the kitchen. Elena had maybe 30 seconds before whoever it was discovered the hidden room. She could slip deeper into the darkness. There had to be another way out of this place, some back exit that... Elena? A woman's voice, familiar but impossible. I know you're here, mija. Your car's in the driveway. Elena's knees nearly buckled. That voice belonged to her mother, but Rosa Vasquez was 3 years dead, buried in a Phoenix cemetery under a headstone that read "Beloved Mother" in English and Spanish. Elena had picked out the words herself. I'm not going to hurt you, the voice continued, closer now. I know this is confusing. I know you have questions. Against every survival instinct she possessed, Elena stepped toward the hidden room's entrance. The woman standing in the kitchen doorway wore Rosa's face, carried herself with Rosa's particular combination of grace and wariness. But this version of her mother looked younger, maybe 40, the age Elena was now. Her dark hair fell in waves around shoulders that weren't bent by years of looking over them. "You're not my mother," Elena whispered. The woman smiled sadly. "No, I'm not. But we're family in ways that matter more than blood. My name is Marina. I wrote the letters." Marina moved into the kitchen with the fluid confidence of someone intimately familiar with the space. She opened cabinets as if she'd done it 1,000 times, pulling out an old coffee pot and a tin of grounds that definitely hadn't been there during Elena's morning inventory. "The first rule of this new world," Marina said, measuring coffee with practiced efficiency, "is that time doesn't work the way you've been taught. The second rule is that some people like us, exist partially outside its stream. We see patterns across decades, connections that span generations. Your mother could do it. You can too, though you've spent years training yourself not to." This is insane. But even as Elena spoke, she was cataloging details that suggested otherwise. The coffee grounds were fresh. Marina's clothes, jeans and a sweater that looked expensive, showed no sign of dust or age despite the house's neglect. And there was something about her presence that made the oppressive atmosphere lighten, as if her arrival had given the house permission to be more than a mausoleum. Sanity is a luxury you can't afford anymore. Marina plugged in the coffee pot, and Elena heard the familiar gurgle of brewing. "Someone's been orchestrating events to bring you here, yes, but not as a puppet, as a player. There's a difference, though I understand it might not feel that way right now. Who? Who's been orchestrating things?" Marina's expression darkened. "That's the third rule. The enemy has many faces, but they're all variations on the same theme: control. They want to map out every choice, predict every outcome, reduce human experience to data points in their grand equation. Your mother spent her life running from them because she understood what they were building." Elena thought about her careful apartment, her rigid schedules, her obsessive need to catalog and categorize everything she encountered. Had she been fighting chaos, or helping to create the very system her mother had feared? "The letters," Elena said. "You wrote them to recruit me." "I wrote them to warn you." The recruitment was already happening. Every time you chose order over spontaneity, every time you selected safety over risk. They've been shaping you into their perfect agent for decades, Elena. Someone who sees patterns, values control, trusts systems over instincts. Marina poured 2 cups of coffee, the smell rich and grounding. "The question is whether you're going to let them finish the job, or if you're ready to learn what you were really meant for." Outside, the fog pressed closer to the windows, and Elena realized that sunset, and her deadline, was approaching faster than time should allow. Elena stared at Marina's steady hands as she stirred honey into her coffee cup, the normalcy of the gesture a stark contrast to the impossibility of everything else. What was I really meant for? To break their system from the inside. Marina settled into a chair that had definitely been broken this morning. Elena remembered cataloging it as damaged beyond repair. Now it looked pristine, as if time itself had rolled backward to accommodate their conversation. "Your mother tried to run from her purpose. You've been running toward yours without knowing it." The coffee was perfect, exactly the way Elena liked it, though she'd never told anyone about the specific ratio of cream to honey she preferred. Marina noticed her surprised expression and smiled grimly. "I've been watching you longer than you know. Not stalking, protecting, making sure you stayed alive long enough to reach this moment." She gestured toward the window where fog swirled in patterns that looked almost deliberate. "They've been trying to eliminate our bloodline for 3 generations. Your grandmother died in what looked like a car accident. Your mother would have died the same way if she hadn't kept moving. And you expect me to believe this is all real?" But Elena's voice lacked conviction. Every detail of the past day, the impossible letters, the house that existed outside normal geography, Patricia's 2 convenient legal complications, fit together like puzzle pieces she'd been trying to ignore. Marina stood and walked to the kitchen window, her reflection ghost-like against the gathering darkness. Your appointment book for next Tuesday has you scheduled to evaluate the Blackwood estate in Portland. Old Victorian. Family disappeared mysteriously in the 1980s. Patricia was planning to send you alone, despite company policy requiring partners for high-value assessments. Elena's blood chilled. That was exactly right, down to details she hadn't shared with anyone. How could you possibly... Because Tuesday would have been your last day alive. Marina's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. They've been positioning pieces for months. The Blackwood house is a trap, Elena. Walk in alone, and you'll disappear just like the family did. Another mysterious vanishing, another loose end tied up. The reality of it hit Elena like cold water. Every careful choice she'd made, every professional decision she'd prided herself on, none of it had been her own. She'd been herded toward this moment like cattle toward slaughter, and her meticulous nature had made her the perfect mark. My mother, Elena whispered. What did she actually know? Marina returned to the table, her expression softening with something that might have been grief. Rosa figured out that estate appraisal companies were being used to identify and eliminate people like us, families with the gift, bloodlines that could see patterns across time. Think about it. Who else gets unrestricted access to the homes and possessions of the recently dead? Who else catalogues family histories, documents bloodlines, maps connections between generations? Elena's mind raced, connecting dots she'd been trained to ignore. The unusual number of appraisers who died in accidents, the way certain estates never made it to public auction, their contents disappearing into private collections. The Morrison family's insistence on handling special cases personally. Patricia Morrison, Elena said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Third-generation operative. Her grandmother founded the company specifically to hunt people like us. Your hiring wasn't chance, Elena. It was a 20-year investment in the perfect weapon. Marina checked an antique watch that looked expensive enough to fund a small country. They've been training you to think like them, to see human lives as data points to be organized and catalogued. When you finally broke, when the cognitive dissonance became too much, you'd either join them willingly or end up like the Blackwood family. Exactly. The fog outside had thickened into something that looked more like wool than water vapor, pressing against the windows with an urgency that made Elena's skin crawl. But there's a fourth rule I haven't told you yet. The system they've built has a weakness. It depends on people believing they have no choice, that their fates are written in stone. The moment someone truly breaks free, acts on pure, unpredictable impulse, the whole equation collapses around them. Elena felt something shifting inside her chest, a loosening of bonds she hadn't realized existed. The careful woman who'd driven here this morning, the one who color-coded her files and scheduled her emotions, was dissolving like sugar in rain. What happens if I say yes? Marina's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Then we teach you to write your own story, and more importantly, we teach you to help others write theirs. She stood, extending her hand. But first, we need to leave this place. The fog isn't natural, Elena. It's a containment protocol. They know you're here. Outside, something that wasn't quite wind began to howl through the trees, and Elena realized her deadline wasn't sunset anymore. It was right now. Elena stared at Marina's outstretched hand, paralyzed by the weight of choice. The howling outside intensified, no longer resembling wind but something mechanical and predatory. Through the kitchen window, shapes moved within the fog, too tall and angular to be human, yet moving with purpose that felt terrifyingly familiar. They're here, Marina said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. The containment team. Elena, we have seconds, not minutes. But Elena couldn't move. Every instinct screamed contradictions. Run toward Marina, run from her, stay frozen until the nightmare resolved itself into something manageable. This was her greatest fear made manifest, losing control completely, stepping into chaos with no map, no schedule, no careful plan to guide her through. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't know how to live without knowing what comes next." "Yes, you do." Marina's eyes held depths Elena hadn't noticed before, ancient and knowing despite her young face. "You've been practicing your whole life. Every estate you catalogued, every family history you pieced together from fragments, you were learning to find meaning in chaos, to create order from broken narratives. That's not their training, Elena. That's your gift." The front door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Heavy boots echoed through the house, multiple sets moving with military precision. Elena heard Patricia Morrison's voice directing the operation, cold and professional in a way that made her stomach lurch. "Upstairs first. Check every room. She's cornered. No way out except through us." Marina grabbed Elena's wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. The hidden room, now. They rushed through the pantry into the impossible space beyond, but Marina didn't stop at the shelves of letters. Instead, she pressed against the far wall, and another door swung open, older than the house itself, carved with symbols that hurt Elena's eyes to look at directly. "This is why the house was really built," Marina said, pushing Elena toward the doorway. "Not as a home, but as a way station, a place between places." Behind them, footsteps thundered down the hallway. Elena heard Patricia barking orders, "Seal the exits." Nobody leaves this property alive. Elena's training kicked in, not Morrison's careful conditioning, but something deeper, the same instinct that had helped her piece together family histories from scattered photographs and faded documents. She looked at the carved symbols and suddenly understood their pattern, their purpose. They weren't random markings, but a map, a guide for navigation through spaces that existed between normal geometry. "You know what they mean," Marina said, not a question but recognition. "Passage markers," Elena breathed. "Like breadcrumbs, but for places that don't follow standard rules." She traced one symbol with her finger and felt it warm to her touch. "My mother taught me these when I was little. I thought they were just doodles she made when she was nervous. Rosa was preparing you the only way she could, disguising lessons as games, training as childhood comfort." Marina's voice carried pride and sadness in equal measure. She knew this day would come. The hidden room's entrance burst open behind them. Elena spun to see Patricia Morrison framed in the doorway, no longer the kindly mentor, but something predatory wearing a familiar face. Her eyes held the cold intelligence of someone who saw human lives as problems to be solved through elimination. "Elena, step away from her," Patricia commanded. "You don't understand what Marina really is, what she's offering you. Come with me, and we'll explain everything properly. No more confusion, no more fear, just the order you've always craved." For a moment, Elena wavered. Patricia's offer promised everything she'd built her life around: certainty, structure, safety. All she had to do was walk away from the impossible doorway, forget the letters, return to her carefully catalogued existence. But then she thought about the Blackwood family, about how they'd probably been offered the same choice, about her mother's lifelong terror of staying in one place too long, about all the estate appraisers who died in accidents, after encountering things that didn't fit their official reports. "No," Elena said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I'm done being managed." She stepped through the carved doorway into darkness that felt like possibility instead of ending. Marina followed, pulling the door closed just as Patricia's team reached them. The last thing Elena heard was Patricia's voice, no longer controlled but furious. "Burn it all. Burn the whole house down." The door sealed with finality, and Elena found herself standing in a space that defied description. Not a room or corridor, but something between states of being. Around them, other doorways beckoned, each leading to places that existed in the margins of reality. "Welcome to your real education," Marina said, her smile fierce with triumph. "Now we teach you to fight back." Behind them, Elena felt the house burning, taking her old life with it. Ahead lay uncertainty and chaos, and the terrifying freedom of writing her own story. For the first time in her adult life, she stepped forward without knowing where she was going, and discovered that felt like coming home. The space between worlds felt like walking through honey made of starlight. Elena's feet found purchase on surfaces that shouldn't exist, while doorways flickered in and out of reality around them like television channels being switched too quickly. Marina moved with confident strides, but Elena noticed something troubling in her guide's posture, a tension that hadn't been there moments before. "Marina," Elena called, her voice echoing strangely in the non-space. "How many times have you done this?" Marina's step faltered almost imperceptibly. "Done what?" "Rescued someone like me. Led them through these passages." Elena's appraiser instincts were screaming warnings she couldn't yet articulate. "You know these symbols, this route, like you've traveled it before." "How many others?" They emerged onto what looked like a narrow bridge, spanning an impossible chasm filled with swirling galaxies. Marina finally turned, and in the cosmic light, Elena saw something that made her blood freeze. Her guide's eyes held not just ancient knowledge, but ancient grief. The weight of countless failures. 17, Marina whispered. "You're the 18th person I've tried to save." Elena stopped walking. The bridge stretched ahead into darkness, punctuated by more doorways, more choices, but something in Marina's admission made her legs refuse to move forward. What happened to the others? They couldn't handle it. Marina's voice cracked. The freedom, the uncertainty, the responsibility of writing their own stories. Without the structure they'd built their lives around, they unraveled. The cosmic vista around them began to shift, showing Elena glimpses of faces in the stellar dust, men and women of different ages, all with the same haunted expression she'd seen in her own mirror that morning. People who'd discovered their lives were lies, who'd been offered the chance to break free, who'd stepped through impossible doorways just as she had. "Thomas Blackwood made it 3 weeks before he walked into traffic," Marina continued, her confession pouring out like poison from a wound. "Sarah Chen lasted 2 months before she disappeared entirely, just left her apartment one day and never came back. Michael Rodriguez tried to go back to his normal life, but he'd seen too much. Patricia's people found him anyway." Elena felt the bridge beneath her feet growing unstable, or maybe that was just her worldview crumbling again. "You're telling me that escape is actually another trap?" "Not a trap. Just harder than I wanted to believe." Marina reached toward her, but Elena stepped back. "Elena, you're different. Stronger. You have your mother's gift, but without her fear. I can what? Join your collection of broken people? Become the 19th failure in your rescue mission?" Elena's voice rose to match the howling of distant cosmic winds. "You didn't save me, Marina. You just changed the method of my destruction." Behind them, the doorway they'd entered through began to glow with orange light. Patricia's team had found a way to follow, burning through the barriers between worlds with whatever technology they'd developed for hunting people like Elena. The smell of smoke reached them even here, in this place between places. Marina's face went white. "That's impossible. The passages are supposed to be secure." "Nothing's secure." Elena laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "That's what you've been trying to tell me, isn't it? No safety, no certainty, no control over anything, just chaos wearing different masks." The bridge shuddered as pursuit drew closer. Through the cosmic vista, Elena saw Patricia Morrison's face materialize like a nightmare constellation. Cold, determined, backed by resources that could apparently reach into spaces that shouldn't exist. Around them, other doorways began slamming shut one by one, escape routes collapsing as the net tightened. "Elena, please." Marina grabbed her arm, desperation replacing her earlier confidence. "I know I should have told you about the others, but you needed hope more than I needed truth." Elena pulled free, understanding flooding through her with sickening clarity. "You've been using people like me to convince yourself that escape is possible. 17 failures, and you're still trying because you can't face the reality that maybe there is no way out." The pursuing light grew brighter, and Elena heard Patricia's voice echoing across impossible distances. "End of the line, Elena. There's nowhere left to run." Marina was crying now, tears that fell upward into the cosmic void. "I'm sorry. I thought I really believed you could be the one who made it. Elena looked ahead at the remaining doorways, each leading to uncertainty, to a life of running and hiding and watching over her shoulder for threats that could follow her anywhere. Behind her, Patricia's people closed in with their promise of ordered destruction. Around her, the space between worlds began collapsing under the weight of too much human anguish. For the first time since finding the letters, Elena felt truly alone. No mentor to guide her, no enemy to fight, no clear choice between order and chaos. Just the terrible freedom of making decisions without knowing if any of them mattered. The bridge cracked beneath her feet, and Elena realized she was about to fall into something far worse than death, the endless uncertainty of a life with no solid ground. All her careful plans shattered. All her hopes for freedom revealed as another kind of prison. Everything was lost. As the bridge splintered beneath her feet, Elena felt herself falling not through space but through understanding. The cosmic void rushed around her, and in that moment of weightless terror, something clicked into place. Not like a lock opening, but like a puzzle revealing its true picture. She wasn't falling toward destruction, she was falling toward choice. "Stop!" Elena commanded, and impossibly, she did. Suspended in the swirling galaxies, neither rising nor descending, held by nothing but her own voice. The pursuing lights halted above her, Patricia's face frozen in the stellar dust. Marina hung motionless nearby, tears suspended like diamonds in the cosmic wind. Elena understood now why 17 people had failed, why Marina carried the weight of their destruction. They had all been looking for the same thing Elena had craved her entire life, a new kind of certainty to replace the old one. Freedom that came with guarantees, rebellion with safety nets, chaos with hidden order. But that wasn't what the letters had been trying to teach her. The predictions were never about destiny, Elena said aloud, her words rippling through the space between worlds. They were about pattern recognition. She thought of her mother, constantly moving, never settling. Rosa hadn't been running from fate. She'd been running from the seductive comfort of believing someone else was writing her story. The letters hadn't predicted Elena's choices because they were predetermined. They'd predicted her choices because someone had spent decades studying her psychological patterns, her responses to stress, her desperate need for control. "Every decision I made was mine," Elena continued, feeling power build in her voice like pressure in a steam engine. "Even when I thought I was being manipulated, even when Patricia or Marina or whoever wrote those letters thought they could predict what I'd do, the choice was still mine to make." The cosmic void began to respond to her understanding. Doorways that had slammed shut started creaking open again. The bridge reformed beneath her feet, stronger than before. Above her, Patricia's pursuit faltered as their technological certainty met something they hadn't accounted for: genuine unpredictability. Marina stared at her with something approaching awe. "Elena, how are you?" "I'm not special," Elena interrupted, but her voice carried conviction instead of bitterness. "I'm not the chosen one. I'm not destined for greatness. I'm not the 18th attempt at salvation. I'm just a woman who finally understands that uncertainty isn't a problem to be solved. It's the point." She looked at the doorways around them, each leading to unknown futures. Some probably led to versions of Earth where Patricia's organization held power. Others might lead to places where people like Elena were hunted to extinction. Still others could open onto realities where the very concept of predetermined fate had never taken root. "The 17 who came before," Elena said, "they didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because they were still looking for someone else to tell them what to do. Marina offering salvation instead of Patricia offering order. It's the same cage with different decoration." Elena began walking across the reformed bridge, not toward any specific doorway but simply forward. With each step, the space around them grew more stable, more real. The pursuing lights dimmed as Patricia's certainty-based technology encountered something it couldn't calculate. A human being who had stopped trying to predict her own future. "Where are you going?" Marina called after her. "I don't know," Elena replied, and for the first time in her life, those words felt like victory instead of defeat. "I'm going to make choices without knowing their outcomes, help people without guaranteeing success, and build something meaningful on ground that might shift under my feet at any moment. Behind them, Patricia's voice cut through the cosmic wind. "This isn't over, Elena. You can't run forever." Elena turned back to face her former employer, suspended in the stellar void like a judgment waiting to be passed. "You're right, Patricia. I can't run forever. But I'm not running anymore." She closed her eyes and thought about the Moss house, about all the estate appraisers who died in accidents, about families like the Blackwoods who'd been eliminated for possessing gifts that threatened someone's need for control. When she opened her eyes again, she knew exactly what choice she was going to make. Marina, how many other people are there like us? People who've seen the letters, who've started questioning their predetermined lives. Marina's expression shifted from grief to something that might have been hope. Hundreds, maybe thousands, scattered across different realities, different versions of the same trap. Elena smiled, feeling something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that came from accepting absolute uncertainty. "Then we'd better get to work." She stepped forward into the swirling cosmos, not toward escape, but toward the hardest choice of all, fighting back without knowing if victory was possible, helping others without guarantees of success, building hope on the foundation of acknowledged chaos. Everything had changed, not because Elena had found a new kind of certainty, but because she'd finally learned to dance with doubt. The cosmic void responded to Elena's declaration like a universe holding its breath, then releasing it all at once. The swirling galaxies around them began to coalesce into something more concrete, not solid ground, but platforms of crystallized starlight that rang like bells beneath their feet. "First things first," Elena said, her voice carrying an authority she'd never possessed as an estate appraiser. "We need to find the others, the ones who survived their escapes but are still hiding, still afraid." Marina wiped away tears that sparkled like nebulae in the strange light. "Elena, you don't understand how scattered they are. Some exist in realities where history took different turns. Others have hidden so deep in the margins of their worlds that then we learn to navigate better." Elena gestured at the reformed doorways surrounding them. "You said these passages connect different versions of reality. That means there's a network, a system. Systems can be mapped, understood, used." She moved toward the nearest doorway, studying the carved symbols that had hurt her eyes before. Now they seemed familiar, almost welcoming, not because they'd changed, but because she'd stopped trying to force them into categories her rational mind could accept. "My mother's doodles," Elena murmured, tracing a spiral that seemed to spin beneath her finger. "She wasn't just teaching me to recognize passage markers. She was teaching me to think in multiple dimensions, to see patterns that exist between normal patterns." Marina approached cautiously, as if Elena might dissolve if startled. "The gift runs in bloodlines, but it usually skips generations. Rosa must have known you'd inherited it stronger than anyone expected." "Gift." Elena tasted the word, found it both accurate and insufficient. "It's not a superpower, is it? It's more like an allergy to predetermined narratives, an inability to accept that stories have only one possible ending." Through the doorway, Elena glimpsed a version of Salem, where the Moss house still stood, but glowed with warm light instead of decay. In another, she saw a Portland where impossible architecture spiraled toward skies filled with multiple moons. Each reality seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, its own possibilities. "The people Patricia's organization eliminates," Elena said, understanding dawning like sunrise after the longest night. "They're not dangerous because they have supernatural powers. They're dangerous because they prove that reality is more flexible than the controllers want anyone to believe." "Exactly." Marina's voice carried decades of suppressed anger. "Imagine if everyone knew that their lives weren't fixed scripts, that individual choices could literally reshape the world around them. Imagine if people stopped looking for authorities to tell them what was possible." Elena felt a familiar itch, the same compulsion that had driven her to catalogue every possession in houses full of other people's memories. But now, instead of wanting to organize objects, she wanted to map the unmappable, to create guides for navigating uncertainty without destroying its essential nature. "We'll need resources," she said, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Safe houses in multiple realities, communication networks that can't be monitored by people who think in single timelines, training programs for people who've just discovered their lives aren't what they thought. "Elena." Marina grabbed her arm, gentle but urgent. 17 people tried to build exactly what you're describing. The scope of it, the complexity, it breaks minds that aren't ready for that level of responsibility. Then we start smaller. Elena pulled out her phone, somehow still functional despite everything they'd been through. The screen showed missed calls from her office, text messages from clients, emails about property assessments, the debris of her former life. "We start with one person at a time, one choice at a time. We don't try to save everyone. We just try to show them that salvation is something they have to do for themselves." She deleted the missed calls without listening to them, feeling each erasure like a small act of rebellion against her own need for closure. When the phone was clear, she opened a new note and began typing, for people who found letters or seen doors that shouldn't exist, or started questioning the story they've been told about their own lives. "What are you doing?" Marina asked. "Creating a message board, a place for people to find each other without anyone having to be rescued." Elena's fingers moved with growing confidence across the screen. No leaders, no followers, no predetermined outcomes, just resources and connection points for people who've decided to write their own stories. Above them, Patricia's pursuit had fallen silent, not because they'd given up, but because they'd encountered something their prediction algorithms couldn't process. Elena smiled grimly, imagining the confusion in their monitoring stations as she became genuinely unpredictable. "It might not work," Marina said softly. "Probably won't," Elena agreed, posting her first message into the digital void and watching it propagate across networks that existed between normal networks. "That's what makes it worth trying." The cosmic space around them began to shift again, responding to Elena's growing certainty about uncertainty. Doorways multiplied, pathways branched, and possibilities bloomed like flowers made of pure potential. For the first time since childhood, Elena felt truly awake. The first response came 12 minutes after Elena posted her message, a single line that appeared on her phone in shimmering text that seemed to write itself. "I found letters too. Thought I was going insane. Where do I begin?" Elena stared at the words, feeling something shift in her chest. Not the crushing weight of responsibility she'd expected, but something lighter, like recognition. "Someone's out there," she whispered, then looked up at Marina. "Someone else is ready to start writing their own story." Marina peered over her shoulder as more messages began appearing, each one materializing in that same ethereal script that shouldn't have been possible on a normal phone. Messages from different versions of Earth, different timelines where people had found their own versions of the letters, their own impossible doorways. "This is what I should have done years ago," Marina said, her voice thick with regret. "Instead of trying to rescue people, I should have helped them rescue themselves." Elena was already typing responses, creating a simple framework, not rules, but suggestions, meeting places that existed in the spaces between realities, communication protocols that worked across dimensional barriers. Most importantly, a single governing principle: no one gets to tell you what your freedom looks like. The cosmic space around them continued to transform as Elena worked. The chaotic swirl of galaxies organized itself into something resembling a vast library, with doorways serving as entrances to different sections. Each choice Elena made, each message she sent, created new pathways for others to follow or ignore as they saw fit. "Elena," Marina said urgently, pointing upward, "they're coming back." Patricia's forces had regrouped, approaching from multiple angles with new equipment that blazed with harsh artificial light. But something had changed in their approach. Instead of the confident pursuit Elena remembered, their movements seemed hesitant, uncertain. "They can't predict what I'm going to do anymore," Elena realized. "By accepting that I don't know my own next move, I've broken their ability to anticipate it." Her phone chimed with another message. Found the door behind my bookshelf last night. Too scared to go through. Is it worth it? Elena smiled, typing back. Only you can answer that. But if you decide to step through, you won't be alone on the other side. More messages flooded in, a digital avalanche of people who'd been living in isolation with their impossible discoveries. Elena found herself becoming something she'd never expected, not a leader or a savior, but a facilitator, someone who helped lost people find each other without telling them what to do once they connected. This is actually working, Marina breathed, watching the message board grow into something resembling a living network. People are sharing locations, resources, warnings about places where Patricia's organization is strongest. Elena nodded, but her attention was caught by a message that made her blood run cold. They took my sister yesterday. Same people who've been watching my house since I found the letters. Is there any way to get her back? For a moment, Elena felt the familiar urge to take control, to craft a rescue plan, to promise outcomes she couldn't guarantee. Then she caught herself and typed carefully, I don't know if we can save her, but I know we can try. Anyone else dealt with abductions? The responses came quickly. Other people who'd lost family members, friends, colleagues to Patricia's organization. But instead of despair, Elena saw something she hadn't expected: collaboration. People sharing intelligence, pooling resources, organizing rescue attempts with the understanding that failure was possible, but action was still worthwhile. They're learning to function without certainty, Elena said, watching the network grow stronger with each uncertain choice. That's something Patricia's people will never understand, how to be effective while acknowledging that effectiveness isn't guaranteed. Above them, the pursuing lights had stopped advancing entirely. Through the crystalline air, Elena could hear Patricia's voice, but it sounded different now. Frustrated, almost desperate. This isn't sustainable, Elena. Without structure, without guidance, they'll destroy themselves. Elena looked up at her former employer, seeing clearly for the first time. Patricia wasn't evil. She was terrified of chaos, of unpredictability, of the possibility that people might make choices that couldn't be controlled or corrected. Maybe some of them will, Elena called back. Maybe some of our rescue attempts will fail. Maybe some of the people we're trying to help will make terrible decisions. Maybe everything we're building will collapse tomorrow. She stood, phone still chiming with new messages, surrounded by doorways that led to uncertain futures. But that's not a reason to stop trying. That's the reason trying matters. Patricia's lights began to dim, not in defeat, but in something like confusion. They'd built their entire system around the assumption that people needed certainty to function, that chaos was the enemy of human flourishing. Elena smiled, watching her phone fill with messages from people choosing uncertainty over safety, collaboration over control, hope over guarantees. The final confrontation wasn't coming. It was already here, and it was being fought one small choice at a time by people who'd finally learned that freedom was something you practiced, not something you achieved. The moment stretched between them like a bridge made of crystallized doubt, Patricia's confused silence ringing through the cosmic library that Elena's choices had built. Then, the lights began to change, not dimming further but fracturing into smaller, more desperate clusters. You still don't understand. Patricia's voice echoed from multiple directions now, as if she was speaking through several different versions of herself. Show them what happens when the structure fails completely. The doorways around Elena began to shake. Through their openings, she glimpsed flashes of chaos, realities where people with gifts like hers had tried to build networks of freedom and watched them collapse into violence, confusion, despair. Worlds where the absence of control had led not to liberation, but to destruction. Elena's phone went silent. The growing network of messages froze, then began to flicker, as if the connections themselves were under attack. This is the final test, Marina said quietly, understanding flooding her voice. Patricia isn't just trying to stop you anymore. She's trying to prove that what you're building is doomed to fail. Elena watched her phone screen fracture into 17 different versions of itself, each showing a different timeline where someone like her had reached this exact moment. In one, she saw herself giving up, accepting Patricia's offer of controlled order. In another, she watched herself burn out from the overwhelming responsibility of trying to help everyone. A third showed her transforming into another version of Patricia, convinced that people needed to be managed for their own good. 17, she whispered, recognizing the number that had haunted her since finding the letters. 17 different ways to fail this moment. But as she studied the fractured screen, Elena noticed something Patricia had missed. In each timeline, the failure hadn't come from the choice itself, it had come from trying to guarantee the outcome. Every previous Elena had reached this moment and then tried to control what happened next, to ensure that the network she was building would succeed, to protect people from the consequences of their own freedom. No, Elena said, her voice carrying across the cosmic space with unexpected authority. The test isn't whether I can build something that won't fail. The test is whether I can build something knowing it might fail, and that being okay with that. She held up her fractured phone, watching the 17 different timelines pulse with their 17 different disasters. Then, deliberately, she chose none of them. Instead, she opened a new message and began typing, "The network is under attack. We might lose everything we've built so far. What do you want to do about that?" The responses came immediately, not through Patricia's interference but around it, flowing through pathways that existed in the spaces between certainty and chaos. Messages from people who'd learned to function without guarantees, who'd discovered that collaboration didn't require perfect coordination. "Fight back," wrote someone from a timeline where Salem had never been founded. "Losing is always possible, but giving up is always guaranteed." "Build backups," suggested another voice from a reality where estate appraisers were considered prophets. "If they can break one network, we'll build 17 more." "Keep connecting people," offered a third message, this one from a world Elena couldn't quite identify. "Even if the whole system fails, every person who's learned they have choices is still free." Elena smiled, feeling something she'd never experienced before, the absolute calm that came from being completely out of control and completely committed at the same time. She looked up at Patricia's fractured lights, seeing them clearly for what they were, not evil, but afraid. Afraid of the possibility that people might choose badly, that freedom might lead to suffering, that uncertainty might be worse than benevolent tyranny. "You're not wrong," Elena called up to her former employer. "Some of the people I'm trying to help will make terrible choices. Some of our rescue attempts will fail catastrophically. Some of the realities we're building will become worse than the ones we're trying to escape." She gestured at the flickering doorways, at the chaotic messages streaming across her healing phone, at the impossible library that existed because she'd finally stopped trying to organize the universe. But those failures don't invalidate the choice to try. They're part of what makes trying meaningful. Patricia's lights began to pulse erratically, their algorithms struggling to process an approach to failure that didn't involve preventing it. "Elena, please. I've seen what happens when people have unlimited freedom. I've watched civilizations destroy themselves because no one was willing to make the hard choices about what needs to be controlled. Then we'll have to discover what happens when people have unlimited freedom and unlimited responsibility for what they do with it," Elena replied. "Not because I know it will work out, but because the alternative is making choices for people who never asked me to." The cosmic library around them began to stabilize. Not because the chaos was ending, but because Elena had finally learned to build on shifting ground. The final test wasn't about succeeding. It was about choosing to act without needing to guarantee the outcome. Everything she'd learned since entering the Moss House had led to this, the moment when she stopped trying to control uncertainty and started dancing with it instead. Patricia's lights exploded outward in a cascade of frustrated brilliance, filling the cosmic library with harsh illumination that made the doorways flicker like dying stars. When the glare faded, she stood before Elena in her true form, not the composed professional who'd hired her months ago, but something ancient and exhausted, wearing Patricia's face like an ill-fitting mask. "You think you understand what you're choosing," Patricia said, her voice layered with harmonics that spoke of centuries spent making impossible decisions. Let me show you what your dancing with uncertainty actually looks like. The library dissolved around them, replaced by a vision that struck Elena like a physical blow. She saw the network she was building, 5 years in the future. Communities of gifted people had formed across multiple realities, connected by the principles she was establishing now, but without central coordination. Some had devolved into isolated cults. Others had been infiltrated by people who used freedom as an excuse for cruelty. In one timeline, a rescue attempt had triggered a cascade failure that erased an entire version of Portland from existence. These aren't hypotheticals, Patricia continued, gesturing at the unfolding disasters. These are certainties. I've seen them happen across 17 different timelines where someone like you reached this exact moment and made your exact choice. Elena felt her resolve waver as she watched people she'd never met suffer consequences of decisions she was about to make. A woman in Salem, another version of herself, sat alone in a reality where everyone she'd tried to help had either died or disappeared, driven mad by freedoms they couldn't handle. But then Elena noticed something that made her step closer to the visions. In every timeline Patricia showed her, the disasters weren't random. They followed patterns, people failing because they'd been taught to expect salvation from others, communities collapsing because no one had learned to take responsibility for collective well-being, rescue attempts backfiring because they'd been planned by leaders who thought they knew better than the people they were trying to save. You're showing me what happens when people get freedom without learning how to use it, Elena said, understanding crystallizing. But that's not what I'm building. She pulled out her phone, which had reassembled itself into something that looked less like technology and more like crystallized intention. The messages flowing across its surface weren't requests for rescue or demands for leadership. They were people teaching each other, sharing failures as openly as successes, building resilience through collaboration rather than dependence. Look closer at your own visions, Elena challenged, pointing at the disasters surrounding them. In every failed timeline, somebody was still trying to control the outcome. Even me, especially me. Every version of Elena you're showing me reached this moment and then tried to manage what happened next. Patricia's expression faltered as Elena continued. But what if the point isn't to build something that can't fail? What if the point is to build something that can fail gracefully, that can learn from its mistakes, that can dissolve and reform when necessary? That's naive idealism, Patricia snapped, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. People need structure. Without guidance, without someone willing to make the hard choices, without someone willing to make choices for them. Elena interrupted. She gestured at her phone, where new messages were appearing faster than she could read them. Look at what they're actually doing when no one's trying to save them. The messages told a different story than Patricia's visions. People weren't just connecting randomly. They were developing protocols for handling conflicts within their communities, creating support networks for members who struggled with their newfound freedoms, establishing ways to dissolve connections that weren't working without abandoning the people involved. They're learning to be responsible for each other without being responsible to a central authority, Elena continued. They're making mistakes, yes, but they're making them consciously, learning from them, sharing what they learn. Patricia wavered, her ancient composure finally cracking. And when they make mistakes that can't be undone? When someone dies because they chose badly, when realities collapse because no one was willing to enforce necessary limits? Elena felt the weight of that question settle in her chest like a stone. For a moment she stood at the edge of giving in, of accepting that maybe some people really did need to be protected from their own choices. Then her phone chimed with a message that stopped her breath. My brother died in a rescue attempt yesterday. We failed. But before we failed, he told me it was the first time in his life he felt like his choices mattered. I'm not sorry we tried. Elena looked up at Patricia, seeing clearly now that this was never really about control versus chaos, order versus freedom. It was about fear versus love, fear of what people might do with genuine agency versus love for what they might become. Then we'll grieve, Elena said simply. We'll grieve for the mistakes we can't undo, the people we can't save, the realities we can't preserve. And then we'll keep choosing to trust each other anyway, because the alternative is choosing fear. The cosmic library solidified around them one final time, no longer chaotic but not controlled either, alive, responsive, eternal in its willingness to change. Patricia's lights began to dim, not in defeat but in something like relief, as if an impossible burden was finally being set down. Elena had found her answer to the letters, to the predetermined life, to the question of whether anything was truly chosen. The answer wasn't control or chaos, it was conscious participation in the uncertain dance of existence itself. The cosmic library held its breath as Patricia's ancient form began to collapse inward, not vanishing but condensing into something smaller, more vulnerable. When the transformation completed, Elena found herself facing the woman she'd first met at the Moss House, tired, human, carrying the weight of impossible decisions. "You understand what you're asking of me," Patricia said, her voice stripped of its otherworldly harmonics. "I've spent 3 centuries preventing catastrophes, managing timelines, ensuring that people with gifts like yours don't accidentally unravel reality itself. If I stop, if I let go of the controls I've built, everything I've prevented becomes possible again." Elena felt her phone pulse in her hand, messages streaming in from across multiple realities. People sharing resources, coordinating efforts, making plans knowing they might fail. The network was growing stronger not despite uncertainty, but because of it. "I know," Elena said quietly, "and I know that some of those catastrophes will probably happen anyway. People will make terrible choices. Communities will fall apart. Some of us will die because we chose freedom over safety." She looked around at the impossible space they occupied, seeing it clearly for what it was, not just a cosmic library, but a monument to Patricia's exhaustion. Centuries of bearing responsibility for everyone else's choices had worn her down to nothing but duty and fear. "But Patricia, look at yourself. Look at what controlling everything has cost you." Patricia's eyes widened as Elena continued. "You've spent 300 years preventing other people from making mistakes, and in all that time, when did you last make a choice just because it was what you wanted? When did you last fail at something and survive the failure? When did you last trust someone else to handle a problem without your intervention?" The weight of the question hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Patricia's composure finally cracked completely, revealing something Elena hadn't anticipated. Not just exhaustion, but a grief so profound it had calcified into determination to never let anyone else experience it. "I had a daughter once," Patricia whispered, "before I understood what I was, before I learned to see across timelines. She was gifted too, could step between realities like walking through doorways. I thought she was safe because I was watching, because I could see the dangers coming." Elena's heart clenched as Patricia continued. "I failed to see the one timeline where she didn't come back. She chose to explore a reality that was collapsing, thought she could help people escape. The last message she sent was that she'd never felt more alive than when she was making choices that mattered, even dangerous ones." The cosmic library around them shifted, showing glimpses of a young woman with Patricia's eyes, stepping through doorways that led to dying worlds. In every vision she was smiling. "She died helping others," Elena said gently. "Just like the brother in the message I received. They died because their choices mattered, not because they were meaningless. And I swore no one else would have to make that choice," Patricia replied, tears flowing freely now. "I built systems to prevent it, networks to control it, timelines to ensure it couldn't happen again. But you're asking me to let it happen anyway." Elena stepped closer, understanding finally crystallizing. This wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about inherited trauma, about the choice between protecting people from meaningful decisions or trusting them to handle the consequences. "I'm asking you to let people choose what their own lives mean," Elena said. "Even if some of them choose meanings that include suffering. Even if some of them choose endings you can't prevent." She held up her phone, where messages continued to flow. People planning rescue attempts knowing they might fail. Communities forming with the understanding they might dissolve. Individuals taking risks because the alternative was living without agency. And I'm asking you to choose what your life means too, instead of spending it preventing everyone else from choosing. Patricia stared at the messages, her ancient eyes tracking stories of people learning to be free. Slowly, her hand reached out toward a control panel that Elena hadn't noticed before, something that looked like crystallized intention, covered in interfaces that managed the intersection of multiple realities. "If I release these controls," Patricia said, her finger hovering over what looked like a dissolution command, "I won't be able to take them back. The safety nets I've built, the intervention systems, the timeline management protocols, all of it will cease to exist. People will have to handle their own mistakes without cosmic backup plans." Elena felt the magnitude of what was being offered settle around her like a heavy coat. This wasn't just about her own freedom, or even the freedom of the people she was trying to help. This was about the fundamental structure of reality itself, about whether existence would be managed or trusted. "And what happens to you?" Elena asked. Patricia smiled for the first time since Elena had met her, not the controlled expression of someone managing outcomes, but the uncertain smile of someone facing an unknown future. "I suppose I'll have to learn what it means to be human again," she said, and pressed the command that would change everything. The dissolution began like morning fog lifting, gradual at first, then all at once. Elena felt the cosmic library shudder around them as Patricia's control systems unwound themselves across multiple realities. The crystalline panels that had managed timelines for 3 centuries went dark one by one, their algorithms releasing their grip on probability itself. Elena's phone blazed to life in her hands, not with messages but with pure potential. Thousands of conversations that had been dampened by invisible safeguards suddenly flowing at full strength. She could feel the network expanding exponentially as artificial constraints evaporated, people connecting across dimensions without bureaucratic oversight for the first time in centuries. "Oh," Patricia breathed, stumbling as the weight she'd carried since her daughter's death finally lifted. I'd forgotten what it felt like to not know what happens next. The cosmic library around them began to transform, its impossible geometry settling into something more like an actual room, still impossibly large, but grounded in physics that Elena recognized. The floating doorways remained, but they no longer pulsed with managed energy. Instead, they flickered with organic uncertainty, opening and closing based on the actual needs and choices of the people who might use them. Elena caught Patricia's arm as she swayed, the older woman suddenly looking fragile in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the absence of cosmic responsibility. "What does it feel like?" Elena asked. "Terrifying," Patricia admitted, laughing shakily. "And wonderful. I can't see the disasters that might happen tomorrow. I can't prevent the mistakes people are about to make. For the first time in 3 centuries, I'm just here, present, human." Elena's phone chimed with a message that made them both freeze. "The safeguards are gone. We can feel the difference. Some of us are scared. We'd gotten used to the invisible safety nets. But most of us are celebrating. Whatever happens next, it's really our choice now." More messages cascaded across the screen. People across multiple realities adjusting to their new freedom in real time. Some reported that rescue attempts were suddenly working better without algorithmic interference. Others noted that their communities felt more stable now that they couldn't rely on cosmic backup plans. A few admitted they were terrified to operate without invisible protection. "They're handling it," Elena said, wonder creeping into her voice. "They're actually handling it better than your projections suggested they would." Patricia nodded, tears still flowing but lighter now. The projections were based on people who'd been managed their entire lives suddenly getting freedom. "But your network, the people you've been connecting, they've been learning responsibility gradually. They were ready for this in ways I never anticipated." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest as she realized what this meant. The letters that had brought her to the Moss House, the predetermined path that had seemed to strip away her agency, all of it had been leading to this moment, when she could hand genuine choice back to everyone, including herself, "What will you do now?" Elena asked Patricia, who was staring at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I don't know," Patricia said, and her smile widened. "I genuinely don't know. I could try to rebuild some version of the control systems, I suppose. Or I could learn to live like everyone else does, making choices without knowing all the consequences, building relationships that might fail, taking risks because the alternative is paralysis." Elena's phone buzzed with another message, this one addressed specifically to Patricia. "We heard you gave up your safety nets to give us ours. If you want to try being human again, our communities have room for people who are learning how to make mistakes gracefully." Patricia stared at the message for a long moment, then looked up at Elena. "They're inviting me to join them? After everything I've done to control their lives?" "They understand what it costs to protect people from themselves," Elena replied. "And they understand what it's worth to choose to stop." The Cosmic Library continued its transformation around them, bookshelves solidifying into something that could exist in normal space while retaining their impossible contents. The doorways multiplied and shifted, no longer governed by Patricia's algorithms, but by the collective will and need of people learning to help each other without central management. Elena felt herself changing too, her obsessive need for control finally dissolving into something more sustainable. Not the absence of planning, but the willingness to plan, knowing that plans would change. Her phone settled in her hand, no longer a conduit for cosmic forces, but simply a tool for staying connected to people who'd chosen to trust each other. "So this is what freedom actually feels like," Elena murmured, looking around at the transformed space that belonged to all of them now. "This is what it feels like when everyone gets to be free at the same time," Patricia corrected, taking her first uncertain steps toward the doorway that would lead her back to ordinary human existence. Elena followed, carrying her phone full of messages from people building something unprecedented together. A network of support that could fail gracefully, adapt constantly, and trust its members to handle the consequences of their own choices. The resolution felt like coming home to a place that had never existed before. Chapter 17, The Return. The doorway that led back to ordinary existence opened onto the kitchen of the Moss house, and Elena stepped through feeling like she'd been gone for years instead of hours. The October morning light streaming through the grimy windows looked different now. Not harsh or revealing, but simply present, carrying no hidden messages about predetermined paths or cosmic significance. Patricia emerged behind her, moving with the uncertain gait of someone learning to walk without cosmic awareness guiding her steps. She looked around the shabby kitchen with wonder, as if seeing ordinary peeling wallpaper and dust motes was a miracle. "It's so small," Patricia murmured, touching the counter where Elena had first discovered the hidden door. "I'd forgotten how small and specific everything feels when you can only be in one place at a time." Elena's phone buzzed, a normal sound now, not the crystalline chime of interdimensional communication. The message was from David, her business partner, sent 3 hours ago. "Elena, where the hell are you? The Moss House appointment was supposed to be routine. Call me back." She stared at the timestamp, realizing that while she'd experienced cosmic libraries and timeline dissolution, only a morning had passed in normal time. Her old life was still there, waiting for her to return to it. But she was no longer the same person who'd walked into this house seeking control over an unruly estate sale. "I should call him," Elena said, but found herself hesitating. How did you explain to someone that you'd helped dismantle the cosmic control systems that had been managing human choice for centuries? How did you return to cataloging antique furniture when you just witnessed the fundamental restructuring of free will itself? Patricia noticed her hesitation. "It's strange, isn't it? Coming back to a world that doesn't know it's changed. Your partner will expect you to be the same Elena who left this morning." But Elena wasn't the same. The obsessive need for control that had driven her for 42 years had dissolved in the cosmic library, replaced by something more flexible. A willingness to plan while accepting that plans were just starting points for adaptation. She looked around the cluttered kitchen, seeing not chaos to be organized, but simply the accumulated choices of people who'd lived here before. Her phone rang. David's name on the screen. Elena. His relief was audible. Thank God. I've been worried sick. The client called asking about delays and you weren't answering. I'm fine, Elena interrupted gently. Better than fine, actually. But David, I need to tell you something. About the business, about how we've been operating. She walked to the kitchen window as she talked, looking out at Salem through glass that no longer seemed to hide cosmic conspiracies. Just a town where people lived their lives, made choices, handled consequences. We've been taking on too much control over our clients' decisions, Elena continued. Making choices for them instead of presenting options. I want to change that. I want to trust people to handle their own inheritances, their own difficult decisions about family belongings. There was a pause. Then David's voice, confused but concerned. Elena, are you feeling all right? You sound different. Different. Elena smiled at the understatement. I'm feeling like myself for the first time in years. Can you meet me at the office this afternoon? I have some ideas about restructuring our approach, making it more collaborative. After she hung up, Patricia was watching her with interest. How are you going to explain the changes you want to make? Honestly, Elena said, surprising herself. Maybe not the cosmic library part, but the real part. That I've learned people handle responsibility better when you actually give it to them instead of managing it for them. They walked through the rest of the Moss house together, Elena's trained eye automatically cataloguing valuable pieces, while her transformed perspective saw something more important, evidence of a life lived with genuine agency. The accumulated belongings spoke of someone who'd made real choices, some wise, some questionable, all authentically their own. The hidden room, Elena realized, stopping at the pantry door. The letters. What happens to them now? Patricia smiled. They're still there, but they're not predictions anymore. They're just possibilities, one set of choices among infinite others. Anyone who finds them will read them as what they actually are, an interesting curiosity, not a mandate. Elena felt a profound lightness at that. The predetermined path that had terrified her no longer existed, not because it had been destroyed, but because it had never been as solid as she'd believed. Every choice point the letters had described had always been exactly that, a choice. Her phone buzzed with a message from the growing network. Elena, people are asking about you, not for rescue or leadership, but just to know you're okay. We wanted to make sure you knew you're part of this community too, not just its catalyst. Elena looked at Patricia, who was reading over her shoulder. What about you? Are you ready to try being part of a human community again? I'm terrified, Patricia admitted. And yes, absolutely yes. They left the Moss house together, Elena carrying her phone and her transformed understanding of what it meant to trust people with their own lives. The October air felt crisp with possibility, not the overwhelming chaos she'd once feared, but the manageable uncertainty of a world where people were finally free to choose their own meanings. Behind them, the old house settled into ordinary abandonment, its cosmic significance dissolved into simple history. The treasure Elena had found there hadn't been gold or predetermined purpose, but something far more valuable, the recognition that freedom and responsibility were not opposites to be balanced, but partners in the dance of authentic existence. She was going home to a changed world, carrying the knowledge that she had helped change it. Chapter 18, The New Beginning. 6 months later, Elena stood in the renovated offices of Vasquez and Associates, watching her newest client, a young woman named Maria, carefully examine photographs of her grandmother's belongings. The old business model would have had Elena making swift, expert decisions about what to keep, what to sell, what to donate. The new model meant Elena provided information and waited. The china set looks valuable, Maria said hesitantly, but I've never used formal dishes in my life. Would it be wrong to sell something that meant so much to Abuela? Elena settled into the chair across from her, no longer feeling the familiar itch to solve the problem immediately. What do you think your grandmother would want for you? A beautiful set gathering dust, or the freedom to choose what beauty looks like in your own life? The question would have felt manipulative 6 months ago, a way of guiding Maria toward the correct decision. Now it was genuine curiosity about how Maria herself would navigate the choice. Maria smiled, some tension leaving her shoulders. She always said possessions should serve people, not the other way around. I think she'd tell me to sell the china and buy something I'd actually use. Then let's research its value and find buyers who'll appreciate it, Elena replied, making notes that felt collaborative rather than directive. After Maria left, Elena checked her phone. The network had evolved beyond anything she could have imagined in those first chaotic days. What had started as people helping each other navigate crises had become something more fundamental, communities of support that could adapt, fail gracefully, and rebuild without central management. Today's messages were routine miracles. A group in Portland had successfully helped 3 families relocate after job losses, with no algorithmic optimization required. Residents of a small town had organized their own flood response, learning from mistakes in real time. Someone in Eugene was teaching others how to mediate neighborhood disputes, spreading knowledge organically rather than through official channels. Patricia's latest message made Elena smile, learned to drive today. Terrifying and wonderful to navigate traffic where everyone's making their own decisions simultaneously. Remind me why humans thought this was a good system again? Elena typed back. Because the alternative is having someone else decide where we're allowed to go. Fair point. Also, I'm helping organize a community garden. Apparently I'm good at coordinating without controlling. Who knew? The transformation in Patricia had been remarkable to witness. The woman who had managed timelines for centuries was learning to collaborate on small, local projects, helping neighbors resolve conflicts, organizing resource sharing, teaching others how to facilitate group decisions. Her cosmic perspective made her surprisingly good at seeing patterns without needing to control them. David emerged from his office, looking over the week's client notes. He'd adapted to Elena's new approach with bemused acceptance, admitting that their clients seemed more satisfied when they felt genuinely heard rather than efficiently processed. The Morrison estate appointment got moved to Thursday, he said, settling into his own chair. Fair warning, it's going to be complicated. 3 adult children who haven't spoken in years, fighting over everything from jewelry to lawn equipment. Elena felt the familiar flicker of her old response. The desire to research the family dynamics, develop a strategy, manage the outcome. But now that impulse was balanced by something else. Curiosity about what the Morrison children themselves might create, if given space to work through their grief and anger authentically. I'll prepare information packets about their options, Elena said, and maybe we can start by asking them what they hope to accomplish beyond just dividing things up. David nodded, no longer surprised by Elena's faith in people's ability to handle their own difficult situations. You know, our client retention rate has actually improved since you started trusting people to make their own mistakes. Turns out people prefer being respected over being managed, Elena replied, then paused as her phone chimed with an unexpected message. It was from someone she didn't recognize. Ms. Vasquez. My name is James Chen. I inherited my uncle's house here in Salem, an old Victorian place that's been empty for years. I found your contact information in some papers he left, along with a note saying you might understand what it feels like to discover something unexpected in an inheritance. Would you be available to help with an estate evaluation? Elena stared at the message, feeling an echo of that October morning when she'd first approached the Moss house. But this time, the echo carried no sense of predetermined destiny, just the pleasant recognition that life had patterns without being scripted. She typed her response. I'd be happy to help. When would be convenient for you? As she hit send, Elena realized that this was what the new normal looked like, not the absence of mysteries or meaningful coincidences, but the presence of choice in how to interpret them. Someone else might have seen cosmic significance in James Chen's message. Elena saw simply an opportunity to help another person navigate inheritance with dignity and agency. The October afternoon light slanted through her office windows, carrying no hidden messages. Outside, Salem continued its ordinary existence. People making choices, handling consequences, building relationships that might succeed or fail based on their own actions rather than invisible interventions. Elena had found her treasure after all, not gold or predetermined purpose, but the daily practice of trusting people, including herself, to write their own stories. It was messier than the old way, more uncertain, frequently imperfect. It was also infinitely more alive.